Hello everyone, this is Kat, and welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. This is the continuation of Swallow the Stars. This will be Part 2, Chapter 2, entitled Finding a Family. Consciousness snaps into place around him like an upended bucket of cold water, and Cease startles awake, silent but frantic. There is a heavy weight on his chest and his legs, but when his panic brings his hands up and his eyes down, he finds himself face to face with a large, purring orange cat. He settles down immediately, though the cat does bring the question to mind of where he is. He was never allowed pets of any kind at the facility. Clearly he's somewhere else. He sinks his fingers, palms open and bandaged, which seems important, but he can't place why, and there's a sting in his skin under the bandages like they've been cut, but there's no blood on the fabric, so that's probably a good sign of minor wounds only, and it doesn't feel like anything's broken. Into the cat's soft fur, he turns his head, which seems to be supported by a thick pillow. An apartment takes form around him in slow brushstrokes, off-white walls and limited decorations, a low table beside him and an armchair on the other side of that, a kitchen hidden away by a half-wall and a short counter. There's a man in the kitchen, back turned toward him as he works at something on the counter. Aizawa. Pieces of memory, sharp fragments that hurt, that stab, that sear, come back to him. The rain, the blood, the fear, the pain. A tall man in all black, piles of gray scars, and a steady voice that didn't get mad at him for changing, for protecting himself. "Where am I?" he asks, rubbing his throat when his voice comes out strange, raspy and dry, and a little forced out by the weight on his chest. Aizawa looks over his shoulder, eyebrows raised. He doesn't have the scarves right now, and his hair is pulled back into a low ponytail, but those baggy black clothes and deep under-eye bags are unmistakable. Casually he sets something down on the counter and makes his way out of the kitchen and into the living room. "Good morning, Izuku. This is my home." "Is that my name? Izuku?" Something churns uncomfortably in the back of his head, and he clenches his hands into fists to shove the feeling away. Memory or movement, he doesn't care. He doesn't want it. With a slow blink, much like the cat on Izuku's chest, Aizawa lowers himself into his chair. "That's what you told me it was." Had he? Had he said that? Where had he gotten that idea from? That he has a name and a place in the world? He's a number. He's controlled. "Do you remember last night at all?" Izuku's mouth twists. He's still hung up on the name. Aizawa calls him Izuku, and the thing in his head and his spine and his stomach and his palms agrees with it, but he can accept it for now. It's not the worst thing he's been called. Some of it. He thinks that he could remember more of it if he was pressed to, but he very much so does not want to do that. Memory is not kind to him. Being able to not remember something is usually a gift reserved only for the worst tests, and slowly, carefully, Izuku pushes the cat off of his chest and sits up. He has to disturb the cat that's laying over his shins, too, but that one doesn't jump to the floor like the first does. Izuku situates himself in the middle of the sofa, legs folded, and the cat immediately invites herself into his lap, where she curls up and purrs. He doesn't feel nervous, but petting the cat is soothing, so Izuku gladly does so. He doesn't comment on the new clothes that he's wearing, doesn't think about it. "That's Coco," Aizawa says, gesturing at the cat. There's a softness in his expression that wasn't present last night. "And the one that just trotted away is Leo." "Coco," Izuku murmurs, ducking his head to stare at the cat while he pets her. She squints up at him, apparently content. Izuku smiles. "I've never met a cat before." He looks back at Aizawa, and the thing inside of him twists around in his guts and writhes along his spine, effectively ending the peaceful moment. "Are you going to send me back?" There's real panic creeping into his voice, and he can taste the tin of fear, the copper of blood. His chin wobbles, and his breath catches in his throat before it can make it to his lungs. "Please don't send me back. Please, I can't take it anymore. I can't keep doing that." Aizawa puts his hands out, placating. "I'm not going to send you back. Hey, Izuku, look at me." Izuku looks up, eyes wide. His breath is coming in too fast, and he knows that he's tumbling over an edge into the dark that he can't see well enough to latch on to. Static rings in his ears, a promise of freedom, and something to break his fall. He doesn't know how to bring himself down from the fear, has never been taught how to handle his panic attacks with anything other than sedation. "Help me," he begs, and it hurts to say that, to seem weak, to bear himself for judgment, but he has to. Quietly light on his feet, Aizawa moves around the table and across the room to kneel in front of Izuku. Okay, it's all right, Izuku. Breathe with me. He takes one of Izuku's hands and presses his bandaged palm to Aizawa's chest. A deep breath, and Izuku can feel the rib cage expanding below his fingers, the strong heartbeat steady just to the side of his thumb. He takes a breath, and it stops, and trembles, but Aizawa doesn't seem to care. Good. Again. An inhale. You're not going back there. An exhale. I'm not going to let them hurt you again. Inhale. I'm right here. You're safe. Exhale. There are tears in his eyes, and Izuku wipes them away with the back of his hand. He's not calm, but he feels steadier, grounded. When Aizawa moves to stand to leave, Izuku closes his fingers in his sweater and keeps him in place. A moment passes where Aizawa looks down at him, and Izuku's sure that he'll break the grip and leave him like everyone else always did. But then Aizawa sighs and takes a seat on the sofa next to him. Why did you tell me your name is Izuku if it's not? Aizawa asks, hands carefully loose in his lap, eyes casually moving to Izuku's face, and then away again, and then back again. Izuku sniffles and averts his gaze. It told me to. It thought that it would be better than 15. It thought the name fit me. It? A grimace, and then Izuku looks down at where Coco is still curled in his lap. You saw it last night. I didn't want it to hurt you. It didn't either. You're safe. For me, I think. Well, I do like Izuku better than 15, and does it have a name? Aizawa's voice is still riding that line between feeling too much and not enough, almost sounding bored if not for the fact that he's an attentive listener and actively engaging in conversation. Izuku notices these things as passing thoughts, but they're the reasons he trusts Aizawa, the reason that he doesn't want to hurt him, the reason he hasn't bolted out of here yet. Izuku shakes his head. I don't know. It hasn't told me. Are you scared of it? A small whine slips out past Izuku's lips. He doesn't answer right away, focusing on petting Coco in his lap, who is soft and pretty and still purring. I don't want to talk about it right now. That feeling, it's too heavy and so cold, it's hot, or it's so hot it's cold, and God, why does it feel slimy? Or, no, maybe it's more like sandpaper, of something moving against his spine before it settles again. It makes him shudder. Aizawa doesn't seem bothered by Izuku's avoidance of the question, which is yet another thing that makes him so different and so much better than the doctors who had raised him. Okay, that's fine, Izuku. We don't have to talk about it right now. Eventually, though, okay? Izuku nods and risks a sideways glance at Aizawa. There's nothing in his expression or posture to suggest that he's angry, annoyed, or anything bad. His eyelids are droopy, but his eyes have lost the redness along the edges that Izuku remembers from the night before. Maybe it had been irritation then from the rain, perhaps, or the cold, or, well, no, probably not tears, but maybe it's his quirk. Izuku shakes himself out of his steamrolling thoughts. How about this, Izuku? I'd like to tell you some things, and I want you to understand that I'm being honest. And then I want to ask you some questions. If you don't want to answer them, just say so. If you want to ask me something, you can. Is that all right with you, Izuku? Something about the way Aizawa keeps saying his name, Izuku, 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 makes the feverishly panicked part of his brain calm down. This is not the facility because Aizawa's here. This is not the facility because he has a name, one that's not a number but has meaning and weight and use in conversation outside of commands and direction. The tension in Izuku's shoulders lessens. That's all right. Yes. Good. Aizawa actually smiles, and it doesn't matter that it's only barely there. Blink and you'll miss it kind of twitch of his lips. He smiles, and it makes his eyes warm and his face soften and his shoulders curve down, an expression that plays across his whole body. I'm going to start with true statements. The first is that my name is Aizawa Shota, and this is my home. The second is that you are welcome to stay here with me, and that I would like it if you stayed here with me for as long as you want to. The third is that living with me is not conditional. I don't expect anything from you, and I'm not going to make you do anything that you don't want to. Do you understand? Izuku frowns, a small twisting of his lips accompanied by a pinched brow. No one has ever given him a place to stay. He grew up in the facility, and he was told, "This is your room, but it belongs to us. These are your clothes, but they belong to us. You belong to us, and everything that is yours can be taken away." But Aizawa is saying that there's no catch. He's giving Izuku, basically, technically, home, which is so much more than just a room and some clothes that The cost of daily experiments and tests and scars and so much blood. I understand in theory, is what he says, because it's the best way to answer. The more that time passes, the more he feels like a person and less like a thought or a fragment. He can feel himself settling, slipping into a personality crafted through horrible relationships and memories, carved with scalpels and blood. The static recedes, and he feels both more comfortable and more exposed for it. He tightens his fist in Aizawa's sweater, needing the anchor to remind him that this is real, but when Aizawa holds up his hand like he's reaching out, maybe to touch Izuku's shoulder a hair, Izuku flinches away. Amazingly, impossibly, the touch never comes. You don't like to be touched. The first of the questions that he asks, and Izuku shakes his head and then makes a face. I don't think you're going to hurt me, he says, and it's true, Aizawa has given no indication that he is going to be mean to him. But I don't. Touch isn't always good. It's usually bad. He swallows, grits his teeth. He still wants contact, though. Is it okay if I keep holding onto your sweater? That doesn't bother me. So Izuku puts his hand back and he grips tight. I have one more thing to tell you, Aizawa says, hands returning to his lap. My friend, Yamada Hisashi, helped me with you last night. He went to the store to get you some clothes, and he met me here, and we got you dried off and warm. Right now he's sleeping in my room. Here Aizawa points behind Izuku, so he twists his torso to look down a short hallway at a closed door. But he'll wake up eventually and come out to meet you properly. Okay, that's all right. Yet another person who saw his scars then, but someone who's friends with Aizawa can't be that bad. Does Yamada-san live here too? Aizawa shakes his head. Just call him Hisashi. He'll appreciate that more. And no, but he does live nearby in his own apartment. He invites me over for dinner sometimes, and you can come along with the next time that happens. It sounds like an offer, even though Izuku knows it's not. He's a child. He's fully aware of that, and therefore a responsible adult like Aizawa isn't going to leave him by himself. Even still, just the fact that it sounds like Izuku has a choice, for once where neither option is painful, is enough. Can I ask you some questions, Izuku? Nothing difficult. And remember that you can tell me if you don't want to answer, but you do have to tell me if you don't. Izuku nods. He feels oddly safe. Here on this soft sofa with one hand buried in smooth fur and the other twisted up in a thick black sweater. Do you know how old you are? 12. That answer is easy. The people at the facility stated his age before every test because it's just another one of his statistics. His name is 15, he's 12 years old, his blood type is O, he's 150 centimeters tall. Do you know when your birthday is? But this one's more difficult. No, I don't even know what day it is. Right now, I mean. Time was not something I was allowed to have. There were no windows, none that he'd been allowed to see, at least. Izuku followed a strict schedule, so time was not something he was given control or knowledge of. He simply went where he was told to go and did what he was told to do. That's all right, Aizawa assures. Today is May 23rd, a Sunday, and we'll pick a birthday for you then. Whenever you want it to be, you just let me know. A pressure builds in his throat that feels like tears, and Izuku nods. Okay, I'll think about it. Aizawa smiles once more, a little bigger this time, and Izuku feels like he's okay again. The last of the important questions for now, then, all right? Izuku nods, and Aizawa keeps going. Are you all right with having some people over today? The principal where I teach would like to meet you. I told him about you last night because it would be best for you to come to school with me while I work, and I have another friend who's going to bring over a lot of boring paperwork so that you can live here with me and not have to leave. You're a teacher? Yes. That makes a strange amount of sense. Something about Aizawa's dry tone and general patient attitude lends himself well to the thought of him standing in front of a large class of rowdy students, telling them to quiet down and get to work. The image makes Izuku want to laugh, but he doesn't. Yes, I'm all right with meeting them. When are they coming over? Do I have to impress the principal at all? Aizawa shakes his head. They'll be arriving at separate times. Nezu is the principal, and he'll be here before lunch. Tsukuji doesn't get off work until later tonight, so he won't be here until after dinner. You don't have to impress either of them. For a moment, Aizawa's quiet, alternating his time between watching Izuku, glancing toward his bedroom, and looking elsewhere in the apartment. You know, Izuku, he says during a moment when he's not looking. You seem to be pretty smart. Izuku blushes, and though he turns his head away, he knows he fails at hiding it when Aizawa chuckles. Have you done any schooling? Izuku nods once. I had lessons in between the tests, and if I was good, they let me read whatever I wanted to. And what did you want to read? Books about heroes. Izuku smiles, and it's a real smile, even though it's rather small. I love reading about their quirks, especially. It's so cool that they're always finding interesting ways to use their quirks and save people, and stop villains. He'd always hoped that a hero would save him one day, would hear about the people in the facility and take them down, and then find him and bring him to safety. He never got further than that in the fantasy, and really he rarely let himself hope anyway. Hoping never seemed to make a difference. In the end, he had to get himself out. Oh? There's something playful in Aizawa's tone, barely there, barely audible, just edging over the line of truly disinterested. It's so fun to listen for those shifts, to pick up when Aizawa's feeling one way or maybe thinking another. At the facility, Izuku had to pay attention to the doctors and other adults so that he wouldn't make them mad. With Aizawa, he's paying attention because it feels like a game. Izuku turns his back to Aizawa, nodding again, eyes big as saucers. Yeah, I wanted to keep a journal of everything I noticed about their quirks and their fighting styles, and maybe how many people they had saved, but every time I asked for paper and something to write with, I was told no. But that's okay, it's all up here. He taps the side of his head and smiles much bigger this time. Aizawa tilts his head, and Izuku watches as several different emotions move just under the surface of his eyes. Enjoyment, humor, concern, sadness, and then something much softer. How about you come help me make some breakfast, and tell me about your favorite quirk? He can definitely do that. Sure. Despite his excitement, Aizawa wants him to talk about quirks, and doesn't seem to care that Izuku's just a kid who doesn't know anything. He only wants to let Izuku talk, which is probably pity, but it didn't matter, because Izuku gets to talk about something he likes. He's very careful to release his hold on Aizawa and scoop Coco off his lap. He sets her gently onto the cushion beside him, and then all but bounces to his feet. There were only a few books that I could read, but sometimes I got to watch news clips, and that was so cool because it made visualizing quirks so much easier. Once he's on his feet, Aizawa leads the way into the kitchen and shows Izuku what he'd been working on before Izuku woke up. Slicing a loaf of bread into thick, even pieces, Izuku takes a breath from talking about heroes to explain that he doesn't know how to cook, and he waits long enough for Aizawa to say that he'll show him, and then he's right back into it. Izuku talks about the first hero he ever read about, Dusty Rose, a hero from several generations ago who could make roses bloom and use them to herd and capture villains because the thorns were sharp and no one wanted to leave a blood trail. He goes on to talk about heroes from the current era, and he always spends time to make sure to mention their quirks and how they were used by the heroes, but at first he doesn't go into anything beyond that. It's all surface level, all things that anyone could notice. But Aizawa is a quiet listener who makes eye contact when he can and encouraging sounds when he can't, and Izuku feeds off of that like a wildfire in a dry bush. Soon enough, he's talking about things he didn't see the heroes do, things that their quirk could potentially be used for that maybe the heroes hadn't considered. I mean, someone like All Might probably doesn't have to put much thought into it, right? He has super strength for a quirk, so he can really just do whatever he wants, and he basically is indestructible, on top of that, but take Best Genius, for example. Most of his quirk revolves around capturing and containing villains, which is smart and definitely the best use of his time. But what if there are multiple villains and he's alone? I think his quirk takes a lot of concentration, so if a group of villains is working together, I doubt he'd be able to focus on capturing one while the others are attacking him. And especially not if they're out of his eyesight, which is a really big drawback. Obviously, this can be overcome by just working together with other heroes, but I wonder if he's ever thought about trying to be more offensive with his quirk. I mean, I know he uses denim a lot, which is smart because it's durable, but if he wore a different kind of fiber and wove them together, or carried around spare fabric instead of just trying to use what the villains were already wearing, he could probably make a weapon out of it. I don't know for sure, because I've only seen a 20-second clip of him fighting, but that would make the most sense to me. Manipulation of fibers should extend to hardening them, or even making them fly around to strike and deflect attacks. Izuku takes a deep breath, suddenly finding himself rather lacking of oxygen. Aizawa stares unblinkingly at him for a moment, perhaps making sure that he's not about to pass out before his eyes drift past Izuku's shoulders. All of that from a 20-second clip. Also, good morning, Hizashi. Good morning. Izuku turns around. He's not startled. He's not panicking because Aizawa already told him about Hizashi, and he didn't forget, and finds a man slowly walking out of the bedroom. He's wearing an oversized hoodie and loose sweatpants that are black enough for Izuku to think that they might actually be Aizawa's. His blonde hair is pulled back into a bun, and he's got large framed glasses perched on his nose. He looks exhausted, but also familiar. Izuku can't put his finger on it. Did the smell of food wake you up, or the sound of Izuku's brain running at the speed of light? Aizawa turns back to the stove and stirs the sticky sweet mess that he's making inside of the pan. Sorry, Izuku says retroactively, feeling bad for talking Aizawa's ears off. Hisashi yawns and makes his way over to the fridge, pulling out a bottle of juice and setting it on the table. Don't worry, little listener. It's actually reassuring to know that you can talk like that. You were out cold last night. Little listener. Izuku tilts his head and he squints at Hisashi's face as he flicks through every piece of information he's cataloged in the entirety of his life. Radio shows, maybe? No, definitely something he saw on television, in one of the rare times he got to watch. An interview then, or the news. Do I have something on my face? Hisashi laughs, and it's finally that sound specifically, that makes it click. He gasps. Your present mic. Hisashi stares at Izuku, blinks, then looks at Aizawa, who simply shrugs. Yeah, that's me. And then Hisashi's expression unfolds into a big smile. It usually takes a longer time for people to actually recognize me out of costume, if they ever do, so what gave me away, little listener? Izuku, Aizawa cuts in before he can go off on a tangent. Can you grab 3 plates from that cupboard and put them on the table? He points, directing Izuku to where he needs to go. Nodding, Izuku slips between Aizawa and Hisashi, present Mike, and he stands up on his toes to grab the plates. Your laugh, he says once the plates are safely in his hands and the cabinet door is closed. In the news clip I saw of you, you laughed a little at the end. Hisashi blinks, grabs some cups, and sits down at the table. He pulls out the chair next to him and motions for Izuku to sit down as well. You recognize me? From my laugh? Is that weird? Izuku asks, suddenly nervous that he stepped over an invisible line of social cues that he was never taught. That's amazing, Hisashi says and laughs again. Wait. You were talking about quirks before, right? Tell me about my quirk. What do you think of it? Izuku beams, practically vibrating in his seat as he talks through Hisashi's quirk, emphasizing, because the man is in the room with him and oh my god, that he's only seen a few seconds of it in action. But he talks about sound waves and pitches and the negative effects that it can have on someone's body, at which point Hisashi gestures to his hearing aids, and Izuku winces sympathetically. He also brings up questions like, have you thought about using it like sonar? You would probably need support devices, but it would make finding villains and civilian victims even easier, maybe. Or, if you pitched your voice low enough, could you stop a projectile, or a person running at you, or a vehicle? Maybe the volume and mass of the object would matter more than the speed. It takes until Aizawa sets the food at the table, warmed-up toast with freshly made jam, before Izuku finally shuts up, far more interested in eating, at the moment, because he's suddenly so hungry he feels nauseous. But halfway through his toast he stops, his whole body freezing, and he squints at Aizawa out of the corner of his eye. What? Aizawa asks with a glance at him. Are you a hero too? With a shrug, Aizawa returns to his food. Sure am. For a moment, Izuku sits stunned, food forgotten. Even before last night, he'd long since given up on the dream, that hope of desperation of being rescued by a hero. He had studied them and, to some extent, worshipped them, but deep down Izuku had known that he as a person didn't exist enough in the real world to warrant saving. No one knew who he was, let alone where he was. If he'd had a family, surely he must have at some point, no matter how briefly. They were long gone, dead or bought off, which are concepts that he'd learned from the other kids at the facility who were older than him and from the adults themselves. And ultimately, accidental or not, it was Izuku himself who had broken out of that cage. There was no hero to pull him free of the bindings that held him down. There was only a misjudgment during a test, too much pain with both palms forced open, and the darkness had swirled inside of him, too big for his tiny body to handle. There was only an explosion, outward, with all the destruction of a black hole splitting out into an atomic bomb. But it had been a hero who found Izuku in the rain, a hero who saw a damaged and confused boy, and who wanted to help, a hero who saw and experienced Izuku at his worst, killing people, and had decided to bring him home. If Izuku wasn't so excited right now, he would definitely be crying. That's so cool! He bounces in his seat, leaning forward over the table. What's your hero name? What's your quirk like? How does it work? Are there limitations? How do you work around them? Why don't I recognize you? Izuku. Aizawa cuts him off with a raised hand, his expression tired and a little exasperated. Please, at least finish breakfast first. Hisashi burst out laughing, full-bellied and leaning all the way back in his chair. Your face! He points at Aizawa, grin splitting his own face in half, and then starts laughing all over again. Izuku follows the gesture to return his gaze to Aizawa. He'd seen that little sliver of amusement, but he sees a lot of things, understands how to read people because it makes him safer, but Hisashi had seen it too, despite how much it looked like Aizawa's expression never changed. Hisashi must know Aizawa really well. You too. Aizawa says, acting rather put upon, and Izuku can't see if it's real or if there's anything else to glean because Aizawa turns away, his ponytail swishing over his shoulder. Finish your food. Still chuckling to himself, Hisashi returns to his food. Izuku, for his part, finishes his toast in record time and then shoves his hands under his thighs to keep from fidgeting with them. But he can't stop his mind, a constant whir of ideas and questions bouncing around. Dark eyes, rimmed in an irritated red, a quirk that activates through eyesight. Hair floating up around a tired, fearful, worried voice, maybe something related to gravity. That would be so cool, since many of the tests that Izuku had done on him and showcased the thing inside of him had intense control on gravity, specifically on crushing things and imploding them. There's still the question of why he doesn't know who Aizawa is as a hero. Over the years, with the increasing desperation, Izuku had seen and studied an extreme number of heroes, 237, spanning multiple generations and even more countries. Heroics, Izuku thinks, has kept him alive, given him a reason to live, not because he thinks he could ever be one, but because he's so interested in it and likes to think about it. People doing good things because it's the right thing to do. Yes, he understands that it's a job and they get paid for it, but people don't go into hero work without at least some desire to help. Aizawa, as if to spite both Izuku and Hisashi, eats slowly, but when he's done, he turns to Izuku and folds his hands over the table. Scarred knuckles, from punching villains or something else maybe, and there's a dark splotch on his thumb, specifically the nail. From an impact, he remembers a mark like that on one of his toenails, when a heavy machine had fell on his foot and broke 2 bones, and... My hero name, Aizawa says, interrupting Izuku's scrambling, spiraling thoughts, is Eraserhead. You haven't heard of me or seen me in any news stories because I'm an underground hero, and it's my best interest to keep a low profile and stay out of the spotlight. And as much as I can, given my status as a UA teacher. You teach at UA? Aizawa holds up his hands, and Izuku shoves that long line of questioning down for later. My quirk can erase other quirks so long as my target is in my line of sight and my eyes are open. If I blink, it stops working and I have to consciously activate it again. It does work on multiple targets at once, but getting that to be successful is a little complicated. The biggest limitation, of course, is how long I could keep my eyes open. I've gotten good at it, but they dry out eventually, so drawn-out fights aren't good for me, and... He gestures to the hair. I have a tell. Oh, Izuku murmurs, fully enraptured as he takes in the new information. I saw that last night. It floats up when you activate your quirk. When Aizawa nods, Izuku chews on his lips. Why don't you leave it tied up all the time, then? It was down last night. With a shrug, Aizawa gets to his feet, making to clear away the table and wash the dishes, but Hisashi beats him to it and shoos him away. Narrowing his eyes at his friend, likely for taking away his distraction, Aizawa gestures for Izuku to get up and follow as he moves to the living room. It really only becomes a problem in long fights, when it gets harder to keep my eyes open and my quirk is active. Plus, the intimidation factor is nice, actually. On low-level villains, when my hair goes up, they panic because they know that their quirk is already gone. Makes them easier to capture. And the high-level villains? Izuku can't get the information fast enough. He settles back in the middle of the sofa, pulling the blanket around his legs. Koko is nowhere to be seen. Aizawa sits beside him and shakes his head. Doesn't matter. Most villains, most people in general, don't learn how to fight without their quirk. Something clicks in Izuku's mind. A window into another life where he'd never been locked away in the facility, where he still had a mother and a father, maybe friends, and where he'd still managed to stumble upon Aizawa at a critical moment and asked, Can you teach me how to fight? I want to be a hero. Please teach me how to save people. And had been told yes. But you have to fight quirkless, Izuku says, the words not losing their eagerness even though he feels a sadness in his chest over a loss of something that never existed. More or less. Only on a technicality, really, since I don't have an offensive quirk. Aizawa agrees. My quirk puts villains on an even playing field with me, so I just have to be trained and better at fighting and I win. Izuku hums, thoughtful. Does it work if you look through a mirror? He asks, letting the sadness wash off of him. He can just focus on what's in front of him, instead of what'll never be. Another thing that he had learned at the facility. Things are the way they are, and there's no use crying over something that can't be changed. No, tried that when I was a student. It does work, though, through glass, like windows. Ironically, it also works through a two-way mirror. Izuku knows what those are, has stood on both sides of one as observers and the observed. Only if you're on the non-reflective side. That would make sense, because even though Aizawa's quirk is tied to his eyes, it's ultimately a mental quirk because of that part of the brain that processes visual information. He can't remember what it's called right now, but he brings his hand up to rub the back of his head over where it is. A nod. A pause. You know, Aizawa says conversationally, leaning back into the corner of the sofa so that Izuku and Hisashi are both in this field of view. Izuku also doesn't miss that the angle allows Aizawa to see the most of the apartment without turning his head. All this talk about quirks and you haven't mentioned your own. Oh. Izuku goes quiet. He can feel himself shutting down, hands clenching in his lap, fingernails digging into the bandages, as his shoulders tense and draw up toward his ears. He's safe here, or has been so far, so maybe it's okay to say, to tell. But that safety has apparently been formulated while Aizawa ran off on the assumption that Izuku has a quirk. You're worthless. Society doesn't have a place for you. This is all you're good for, do you understand? This is all you can hope to accomplish. His whole life, studies and facts had been thrown at him, talking about quirklessness, talking about suicide baiting and infant mortality, talking about limited life expectancy. Izuku remembers reading them and not understanding anything except a feeling of being distantly other because of something he could not control. It was awful at the facility, but they promised to give him a reason to live. They told him that at least under their care he had a purpose. Out of the corner of his eye, Izuku watches Hisashi step into the living room, hovering on the edge like he knows a bomb's about to explode but doesn't know where it's going to come from. Aizawa sits up a little straighter. Izuku, you don't have to. I don't have one, Izuku says, rushed words, cutting off Aizawa's attempt at damage control. He doesn't look up to see what he's sure will be stunned expressions, doesn't want to live with the shock or the pity or disgust. I'm quirkless. He says the word like it has a bitter taste and twists his hands together so tightly that it hurts. All the kids at the facility were quirkless, they said. The adults. He shakes his head, trying to clear away the tears, welling up in his eyes. The doctor said we had to be quirkless for them to use us, that we were chosen because that made us special to them, because it let them run pure tests on us. They said that out here, though, being quirkless was a death sentence, that we weren't even worth the air that we breathed. He wants to say more, to keep talking as long as he can, because stopping right now means falling into a dark pit that he doesn't know how to climb out of. But Aizawa makes a strained noise beside him, so Izuku shuts up. He still can't look, though, can't raise his eyes from his lap. All of the kids. Izuku. And Aizawa still sounds normal despite everything. He's not yelling, not telling Izuku to leave or shut up. He's still riding that line between apathy and everything else. How many kids are there? Like you? Izuku blinks and 2 tears spill out onto the blanket. He blinks again. Are? He finally raises his head, and gravity pulls the rest of his tears down his cheeks. 1. It's just him now. But there used to be 17, including me. After a moment that could be eons for all Izuku knows, Aizawa gets to his feet, slowly and carefully and not moving in anger despite the clouds in his eyes, the shadow across his face from the information he just learned, and walks through a sliding door onto the balcony beyond. He closes the door behind him. Chin wobbling, Izuku risks a glance at Hisashi. Did I say something wrong? He knows he did, knows he shouldn't have said anything about not having a quirk. Is he mad at me? The massive weight, the formless, enormous thing inside of him twists in his chest, restless and upset. Hisashi looks at him, tears evident even from so far away. Even if he isn't letting them fall, he swallows, and it's a heavy motion that Izuku thinks he can hear. No, kiddo. Izuku, no, he's not mad at you, and he's definitely not upset that you don't have a quirk. Neither am I, little listener. We're just sad about the other kids. Shota, he's mad at the adults. He's mad for you, but not at you. Izuku doesn't understand the difference, not really, but Hisashi doesn't say it like it's a bad thing. He watches Hisashi cross the room, hesitating for a moment with a long look at the sliding glass door, before eventually settling into the chair across from Izuku. They sit in relative silence, Izuku sniffling, keeping it from being absolute as he tries to keep the tears from turning into sobs. It doesn't take all that long before Aizawa is back in the room, and he walks over to the sofa immediately and crouches down in front of Izuku. Can I touch you? And because Aizawa's eyes are red-rimmed again, because he asks, Izuku says, yes. In one motion, Aizawa rises up and pulls Izuku into him, strong arms circling around Izuku's shoulders and back and sides, a steady hand sinking into his hair. Izuku collapses into the touch as Aizawa settles back onto the sofa, and he finds himself tucked into Aizawa's lap. Warm breath tickles on the top of his ear. I'm so sorry, Izuku. And that Finally is the tiny kindness that breaks him. Izuku sobs. Shattered and ugly and wet into Aizawa's shoulder, he grabs wherever he can, an arm, a fistful of a dark sweater, and clings on for dear life. He's never cried so hard before, not that he can remember. He hasn't really cried at all in years, no matter that tears used to come easily to him, so the ferocity of his sobs startles him as he makes himself burrow deeper into Aizawa's arms. There's nothing that Aizawa has done that warrants the issuing of an apology, and that makes it worse, because it means that he's apologizing for something intangible and unfixable. It's less of a sorry and more of a mourning, because Izuku's the last. Because Izuku's the only one of 17 who had managed to hold this thing in his body and not be ripped to shreds. There are so many, many dead children littering Izuku's memories. Izuku wonders, blearily, and between sobs that rip through his chest, when he stopped thinking of the other kids as siblings. Was it when the pain went from frightening to real and lasting? Was it after the first mark appeared on his palm, black and menacing like an ever-watchful eye? Was it when one of the older kids found out that Izuku was doing well and tried to kill him out of jealousy? Izuku used to run around calling them big brother and big sister, laughing when they squeezed his cheeks or tousled his hair. Now he can't even recall what they looked like, their faces hidden in his memories behind static and fear and an inky darkness that always threatens to swallow him whole. And Izuku realizes, with Aizawa's hand slowly rubbing along the line of his back and Hisashi's weight dipping into the sofa behind him, that he could have just as easily been one of the dead ones. He has no idea why the thing inside of him had decided to stay after it had torn through so many others. Why him? What separates him from them? He's not special. There is a thought, a feeling, an urgency, an insistence that rises up in the back of his mind, but Izuku squashes it down and buries it. He doesn't want to think anymore. He just wants to cry and be held by someone who isn't going to hurt him. All right, everyone. This concludes Chapter 2 of Swallow the Stars. Chapter 3 will be next, and as always, thank you so much for listening.